difficulties, but we're going to start our meeting now. And I want to call the meeting to order for the Finance and Governance Committee for November 9th, 2021. But I'm going to read some instructions here for the beginning of a meeting for live public comments and after opening ceremonies. This meeting is being held in accordance with Assembly Bill 361, allowing members of the City Council and members of the public and staff to participate via teleconference. The instructions for how the public may participate in this meeting are provided on the meeting agenda as well as on the city website with oxnard.org/city-meetings/. Members of the public who did not request to speak prior to the 3 p.m. cutoff may do so during the meeting by dialing 888-475-4499. Yes, 888-475-4499 and entering the meeting ID password found in the meeting agenda. You'll be placed in the Zoom waiting room. While in the Zoom waiting room, once I've called for your public speakers for the agenda item in which you wish to speak, press *9 to raise your hand to inform the clerk you'd like to speak during the agenda item. The clerk will unmute you when it is your time to speak. Then you press *6 to unmute your phone. Speakers have up to 3 minutes to speak on per item, agenda item. After all public speakers have signed up for a particular item and have been given an opportunity to speak, the public comment period for that item shall be held open for 3 minutes to allow additional speakers to register or otherwise be recognized for the purpose of providing public comment. During the 3-minute time period, the City Council and staff may discuss the item being considered. In the event of a disruption which prevents the council from broadcasting the meeting using a call-in option internet based on city service option, or in the event of disruption within the city control, which prevents members of the public from offering public comment using the call-in option or internet-based service option, the council shall take no further action on items appearing on the meeting agenda item until the access to the meeting via the call-in option or internet-based service option is restored. However, if any of the broadcast options are disrupted, but if any other broadcast option is still available to the public, the council may take further action on items appearing on the agenda without waiting for the disrupted broadcast options to be restored. Thank you for that. Okay, our next item is we are going to call roll call and posting the agenda and then salute to our flag. Madam Clerk.
Councilmember Basua,
Here.
Chair Zaragoza.
Here.
Thank you. We have quorum. The agenda for this meeting was posted in the City Hall kiosk on Tuesday, November 2nd, 2021. Thank you.
And just for information, Councilmember Teran will be out. He will not be able to participate or any other participants until the elections have been certified by the County of Ventura. Okay, so please join me for the salute to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, our next item on the agenda is public comments, not in the agenda. And currently we have Mr. Lang Martinez. And you got 3 minutes.
Mayor, we received a message that Mr. Lang will not be able to join us, and I will start the 3 minutes for public comment. Start the timer now.
Thank you. Okay, and in the meantime, our next item, once our 3 minutes are up, is going to be our consent item. And that's going to be, the subject's going to be approval of the minutes. And the recommendation at that time, when the time's up, is the Finance and Governance Committee approve the minutes of September 28th, 2021 regular meetings as presented. And we'll take a vote or any corrections once our time's up. Mhm. Okay. We want to thank everybody for bearing with us with our concerns with our internet, but thank you again for waiting, and thank you for staff and also for Eddie and Payne for giving us their time. And staff, of course. Mhm. And Mr. City Manager, I see him smiling. Thank you. Mr. City Attorney, I think we're getting a little light rain out there, huh, that we need desperately. A light, heavy drizzle. The tail end of the storm. I understand they got quite a bit of snow up there in the mountains up in Lake Tahoe and yep. Mm-hmm. And of course, also in the San Francisco area, you know. Mhm. Okay, thank you for your patience. We met our 3-minute. Councilmember Basud, any questions, concerns on the minutes under the consent agenda item?
No. No,
Okay.
Mayor, and I'll move the recommended action to approve the minutes.
Okay, and I'll second that, Madam Clerk. Roll call.
Chair Zaragoza,
Yes.
Councilmember Basua, thank you. Motion passes 2-0.
Thank you. Our next item is the reports. This is the Finance Department, the Audit Committee training by Eddie and Payne. Recommendation that the Finance and Governance Committee receive a training presentation from Eddie and Payne on the roles and responsibilities of the Audit Committee. And the presentation will be live upon consultant's request, and we do have a live presentation by Eddie and Payne. Betsy, do you want to share anything before we start?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Zaragoza. Yes, Edie and Payne are here for the 4th in a series, which began at the beginning of this year, I think calendar year, on a series of bringing training to the Finance and Governance Committee to help broaden the understanding of the roles and responsibility for the committee, as well as their function as the audit committee. So I believe Eden Castanero, who's the partner at Edie and Payne principal, will lead the presentation.
Okay, so we start off with Eden, is that correct?
Thank you, Betsy. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the committee, ladies and gentlemen. We are here again. We are now on session 4. I will try to share this slides that we have presented to you as well. Share.
Mm-hmm.
Oops, wrong.
We can see it.
That was the wrong one, sorry. Can you see Oxnard session 4?
We can.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
All right.
Mhm.
Thank you so much. My screens are kind of inverted. So anyway, we are now on session 4, the last of the audit committee workshop sessions with Edie and Payne. We started back in February, as Betsy said, with responsibilities of the audit committee. And in that same month, we talked about fundamentals of municipal finance that included a guided analysis of the city's annual financial report and single audit report. And then in September, we discussed internal control and compliance. Today, we're going to talk about risk management. If I can get to the next slide. This is our agenda. We're going to talk about define risk management. We're going to identify roles and responsibilities of the committee and talk about some of the concepts related to risk management, particularly risk appetite and tolerance, limitations of risk management, and risk mitigation. And then the most fun part of all, we'll have some practical examples for you at the end. So risk management, what is it? So risk management is a process designed to identify potential events that may affect the city and also to minimize those risks. The goal here of risk management is to ensure that government operations continue in the event a harmful incident occurs. So in addition to that, another goal is to protect the city's property from theft or damage and minimize risks or threats to the city, as well as to individuals like your constituents or employees. Risk management is often thought of as a responsibility of the risk management division. The role of the risk management division usually involves obtaining insurance coverage for various identified risks, and they seek reimbursement from third parties for damages. This type of risk management is very, very important. However, that is only one part of the entire risk management process. So the graphic to the right here on the slide best illustrates the process of risk management. It starts with identifying the risks, risk identification. Identifying the risk is pretty self-explanatory. That is when you pinpoint what events could negatively impact individuals within the city, assets of the city, or citizens of the city. In other words, these are the things that could go wrong. What could go wrong? Those are the answers that the question that you're going to answer when you're identifying risks. So before we complete our workshop today, like I said, we will have some practice doing that. And Hong's going to lead us with that one. The list of potential risks to the city when you start identifying them could be very long and sometimes overwhelming. So the second step, which is the risk evaluation, will help you narrow the list down to the most significant, the ones that you really, really want to address. So risk evaluation is the process of comparing the potential risk against a given set of criteria to determine the significance of the risk. This usually includes a qualitative as well as a quantitative analysis. So qualitative analysis will consider the probability of the potential event occurring and also its impact. Qualitative analysis is great because it allows you to prioritize and rank your risks. So quantitative analysis is a numeric estimate. So most likely it's monetary or a count of how many people could be impacted, things like that. So a numeric estimate of the overall effect of the potential event. This is very useful when you are developing contingency reserves. Step 3 is risk treatment, or sometimes it's called risk mitigation. Risk treatment is the process of selecting measures to modify your risk. So when you start identifying, considering your risks, you will find that you have several options to address them. You can first avoid the risk. That is the very first option that you will consider. And obviously, who doesn't want to avoid any problems, right? However, there are risks that you cannot control or you cannot avoid. So that might not be possible. There are other options that you can use, like transferring your risk or reducing the risk. So those three options that I mentioned, avoiding the risk, reducing the risk, or transferring the risk, means you have to do something to achieve your goal. There is a last option, which is retaining or accepting the risk, because maybe something there's really nothing you can do about it, or the cost of addressing it might be unaffordable to you. So that's something that you will accept. And then there's a combination of those two that all those four options could be combined to enable you to address the risks. So the fourth step, 1, 2, 3, 4, is risk management. And that is the process of implementing the measures you selected on step 3. And then the last step is program review. This is looking at how you're implementing your plan and tweaking it if needed. It's also considering whether your risk appetites has changed or if there are new risks to consider. So in view of this process, it's clear that the risk management should not be limited to just the risk management division. To be truly effective, risk management is best applied throughout the city. To be sure, your top city management should primarily lead the way, and the city attorney should also have a major part of this process. But in order to maximize the benefits of the process, all other departments should be involved as well. For example, if you're talking about cybersecurity risks, who else is best qualified to address or identify and address that risk than the IT department? The fire department could also would know more than anybody how to qualify and quantify the risk associated with fire damage. Your engineers would know more about safety risks in the water treatment plant. So if you think about it, each of the city department could potentially be involved. So any questions so far?
Any, Councilman Basso, any questions? No?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. Mhm.
So let's go to the roles and responsibilities. So as I mentioned, the risk management is primarily the responsibility of the city management. The city council will have its own role, and that is to provide overall direction, resource allocation, and setting high-level objectives. So as the board of governance, the city council ensures that objectives are being met, that resources are being used effectively, and the risks are managed appropriately. The city council also evaluates how city management is effectively managing the identified risks. So the city council exercises this role and its role and responsibility in risk management in its day-to-day activities. So when they come to the city council or committee meetings and they discuss and approve programs, staff reports, contracts, et cetera, they are actually looking at the risks involved in implementing those programs or not implementing those programs, and also the cost and limitations of those programs and activities. And then on the annual basis, the city council approves the city budget. So they also set aside contingency reserves to mitigate the impact of potential events. So those are the roles that ordinarily city council will do.
So Eden, a question. So the question I have is, for example, we're looking at the objectives that are actually set by staff initially. Do we then compare? Do we have a side-by-side comparison as to what the initial objective was compared to where we are now? Is that basically what we're looking at? And the question would be, did we meet it, not meet it, and why? Is that basically what you're sharing here?
That is correct. So the objectives, you actually set, like as a city, you have set objectives for strategically or during your annual budget process and things like that. You set up some objectives to meet. Yeah, so that's the entire city, from the management to the city council, and all your departments are involved in that as well.
Do we look at that at the midterm, or do we wait until the end of the fiscal year? Because by the end of the fiscal year, if it's a little late if they have not met their objectives, right? Wouldn't it be a midterm type of review?
That would be ideal. Okay. Sometimes you could include it in your budget review, or sometimes you could have like a separate determination of where you are in terms of the objectives you've set.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Basoud, any questions?
No, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Go ahead. Eden.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So let me go to the Finance and Governance Committee, who also acts as the audit committee of the city. So the committee assists the city council in overseeing the risk management process. They are the ones who will review the risk management program, if there was one, for risk appetite and tolerance, limitations and mitigations. And don't worry, I will try to cover those bolded terms in the next slides.
Okay.
The committee should also be appraised of the most significant risks and should find out whether management is responding appropriately. So I'm going to segue from here to discuss a little bit something that's maybe you think it's off-ended. So in session 3, we discussed internal control and the role of this committee in internal control. Now we're talking about risk management. How do they correlate? So someone said, and I quote, "You can't have an effective internal control system without effective risk management. But you cannot have an effective risk management without effective internal control." So what does that mean? I think that captures the relationship between risk management and internal control very well. It means that internal control is part and parcel of risk management. Risk management is the broader process. What it means is that when you have an internal control system, it should also include the objectives of risk management. So let me take a look at an example. So let's pretend that you've identified the risk of, say, theft of cash as a potential risk. So you try to reduce the risk by implementing checks and balances at locations where you receive cash. That's internal control. So without going through the risk management process, you may just stop there. That is it. I have controls to reduce the risk. But if you go through the risk management process, you may realize that potentially losing money over a certain threshold, let's just say $100,000, may be a risk that you don't want to face, that you want to avoid. So you may decide to obtain maybe fidelity bonds or insurance coverage to protect against losses over a certain amount. So that is the benefit of going through a risk management process in addition to having internal controls.
And, Eden, my apologies, and maybe staff, and you can help me out, and maybe Councilmember Vasua. The question would be if we're looking at risk appetite and tolerance limitations, mitigations. If we see something wrong, if we potentially see something wrong, do we go to the audit committee? We're the Finance and Governance Committee. We're the audit committee. But who in staff do we go to ask for this particular question? Is that the Finance Committee or City Manager's Office, or what department do we go to?
So
Or
that
the
is
audit.
very good question, Mr. Mayor. So I think if you suspect fraud, for example, and you're probably talking about fraud, some embezzlement, somebody, getting kickbacks, corruption. Things like
Yes. Yeah.
So I think that my opinion, and maybe you have different protocols at the city. The first person that you go to would be the city attorney.
Is it who?
The city attorney.
Okay, good. Okay.
Yeah. So I think because the city attorney actually directly reports to the city council, right? So they are separate from management pretty much. And they have some sort of independence because they represent the city as a whole. And they can also provide you with, the proper protocols,
Right.
how to go about the legal ramifications of these things. Then, they can probably advise you as to what steps to do next.
Yeah, and that was my question. I was going to ask it later, but my question was, what is the protocol for investigation of mismanagement? And you said we go to the city attorney, and from the city attorney, we go to who would be next. Let's assume, well, I know we have the city attorney here. Say the city attorney was and we had a whistleblower that came in and said the city attorney's doing X or Y. Who do we go to? Who would be next? And do we go to the city manager's office or?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, if I can jump in. So we do have a written protocol for this, which was published and issued, but very simply put, we have a protocol for if there's suspicion of elected officials, which
Yes.
include you, the council, the city clerk, and the city treasurer. And then we have a protocol for me, as well as the city attorney.
Okay.
So in basically all instances, Eden is correct. You would report it to the city attorney, and in the instance where the suspected problem is the city attorney or his office, then you would first bring it to me.
Oh, okay.
And that is a written protocol we have with our internal audit program.
Yeah, it's good because our responsibility as a Finance and Governance Committee is to oversee those issues or concerns. And so that's a question I had. And that's a good question. So we then go to the city attorney, depending if we have concerns with other departments, or if we have a concern with the city attorney, we go to the city manager and so forth and so forth. And do we go with I think we have internal auditors and external auditors also to find out what's happening. But then you would take care of that, Mr. City Manager.
Correct. Again,
Okay.
it depends on what the nature of the concern is.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Just don't call my mother.
Gonna call you on Saturday, Sunday. Thank you, Eden. I'm sorry go ahead.
Thank you. That's a very good discussion, actually. So I think I wanted to add, your internal auditor do have, if you needed like an investigation like that will include an internal audit, you could direct them to do that. You could also hire a forensic accountant separate from your internal auditor.
Okay.
Who could help you with any fraud investigations.
Okay. Well, that's a good point. Yeah. Thank you. Okay.
You're welcome.
Councilman Basu, any questions on this item?
No, thank you. I greatly appreciate the discussion.
Thank you. Mhm. Go ahead, Eden. Mhm.
So this brings me to the topic of risk appetite and tolerance. So I have given a definition of these terms up on the top here. Risk appetite is the amount of risk that a government entity is willing to take to achieve its objectives. And risk tolerance is the degree of acceptable variation in performance relative to the achievement of objectives. So in short, risk appetite and risk tolerance really, you really need to ask yourself a couple of questions. When you're talking about this, are you willing to accept or not accept the risk? How willing are you to do that? And where is the line you are not willing to cross? So those are two things that you should ask yourself. The graphic in the middle of the page shows you a matrix that is commonly used to evaluate risks. The column to the left is the likelihood that a potential event will occur. And at the top row, right here, is the impact of such event. So there are events that you can say, you know, it's highly unlikely this will occur. And if it occurs, it's only going to be slightly harmful. So that is considered a trivial risk right here. You can see where I'm pointing. And that risk may be something that most people may just be willing to accept. You know, so they don't want to do anything about it. They're just going to accept that. Then there are events that are very likely to occur. And if it occurs, it is going to be extremely harmful. That's right here in red, intolerable risk, that most people like you and me are probably not willing to accept that. So that is something that most people will avoid. And those are the two like ends of the matrix, but there's like all these areas: tolerable risk, moderate risk, substantial risk. That is, to me, even though they're colored green, yellow, and orange, to me, they're all gray areas. So there's these categories which, depending on your risk appetite and your risk tolerance, your answer could be different. So I could choose to accept anything that's green, and you might gonna say, no, it's a tolerable risk, but I'm not willing to just accept that. So it just depends on your risk appetite and your risk tolerance.
So Eden, is there a threshold from that we look at from slightly harmful to extremely harmful? Is that
I guess that's really up to you.
okay?
So when management, you know, that when you and management look at these risks and you identify them and you rank them, okay, so these are the trivial risks, these are the moderate risks. You could have different answers for all the moderate risks. You could have different answers for substantial risks. So it just depends on what you're looking at, what your circumstances are.
The degree of the item. Okay.
Yeah. So this is a matrix, but obviously you could have more, you know, columns and rows as well.
Okay. Thank you.
So I put like a little tool mark right here, and so that would be a good place to go back to when you're looking at your risks. So like any other, you know, management process, there are inherent limitations to risk management. There's the human factor. We discussed that, like, you know, when we discuss internal control and compliance, we all make mistakes, and sometimes, you know, human judgment may be lacking because of various reasons. There could be a lack of information or a lack of experience. And so one person's judgment may be different from another. We have to accept that there will be some degree of failure or error, something that sometimes cannot be avoided. And then there is a possibility of collusion or management override of processes. We talked about that as well in our internal control discussion. That risk is something that can be reduced to a minimum by having good controls.
Mhm.
Finally, there is the cost of implementing your measures. Nothing is free. There could be monetary cost because you have to pay for alternatives. You have to pay for insurance, for example. Or you may lose opportunities because you decided to avoid a risk. That is a cost of lost opportunities. Or you could lose, your supporters because you didn't like your decisions. So those are things that, you need to consider when you are talking about risks.
Very important. Yeah. Thank you. Mhm.
So any questions at this point? I'm going to turn it over to Hong.
I'm sure Eden, on the human error, and that's probably more training than anything else. And to what degree of failure or error do we look at, and tolerate? So those are good management process that we need to look at. Limitations anyway.
Yeah, I agree. So I'm going to turn it over to Hong to continue.
Okay. Mhm.
Good evening, Mayor, Councilman, Member Pasua.
Good evening.
The next topic I'll go over is risk mitigation. Eden touched upon it a little bit already, but the risk mitigation process is the process of developing options and actions to enhance opportunities and reduce threats to the city's objectives. So what it basically is after you've gone through the process of identifying risk and evaluating the risk and the potential consequences for each risk, you can now design a treatment to mitigate the risks or the consequences of the risk that were identified. Important to know is also that risk identified are unique to each city, even through each department throughout the city. Like Eden mentioned, you could have risks that relate to fire, your water sewer system. But even one city to another could have different risks identified. For example, here in California, tornado risks aren't likely to be considered, but we, especially in Oxnard, wildfires could be a likely risk, or even flooding, whereas other cities in the county might not have that risk. So risks are very specific, and that's why Eden said it depends on the matrix, because it could depend, and the effects of these risks could be different for your city and your constituents versus other cities. So using that matrix will help you though, because it's a somewhat a simplified method to rank your risks and assess your appetite and maybe even the potential consequences so that you can tailor your approach. So right here we have listed the 4 approaches that Eden mentioned before. So you have acceptance of risk, avoidance, transfer, and reduction. So the first item is acceptance of risk. Acceptance of risk is where you're seeing where maybe the cost and the time and effort to address the risk probably outweighs the potential harm of the risk. And like Eden mentioned, these could relate to trivial risk or maybe even tolerable risk, where you just are willing to accept that risk and not set up a treatment plan for it. The next item is avoidance of risk. Avoidance of risk you can consider for your intolerable risk or substantial risks, because these risks generally are related to very or extremely harmful impacts. These are harmful impacts to the city operations, potentially, and even its residents and businesses that are in your city. The prime example of significant risk that you would want to avoid is something that we just all went through, is the pandemic. Of course, it's not something that you might have considered before, but now it's definitely something that the city needs to set up a plan for. And other risk, often common risk that might be extremely harmful are cases of natural disasters, wildfires, environmental spillage or contamination, and even now cybersecurity breaches. So in these cases, sometimes avoidance is not possible. However, it would be the most optimal approach, and the risk management process helps you in at least exploring potential solutions that would enable avoidance. And that's why we emphasize how this process is actually very important. Because if you hadn't even considered the risk, how would you know to deal with it if it were to ever occur, even if it's unlikely or you can't avoid it? So then we have the transfer and reduction of risk. And you'll see these application of this when you really can't avoid a risk, and you might have to apply these processes and procedures to address the identified risk. And these might be applied to your moderate risks. Oftentimes also, it's more likely to have a combination of these methods rather than just one or the other. Like Eden mentioned, to address a specific risk, for example, you can transfer the risk, which in this case, or what Eden has mentioned, could be application of insurance policies. But of course, everyone knows insurance policies are really only effective after the fact. So you can't just transfer your risk, you also want to combine it to reducing risk. And reducing of risk is made easier by having a good internal control environment. Like Eden mentioned, tools in helping reduce your risk are policies and procedures, proper training of employees, proper segregation of duties, and continuous monitoring of procedures throughout the organization. This is specifically something that we look for as it relates to the finance department as your external auditors. So on the next slide, any questions relating to this slide?
No, well, that's some good options to look at, for evaluating risks. Yeah, good points.
Yeah.
Okay.
On the next slide, I'd like to go over some practical examples and the potential areas where you might identify risk. I will go also over to one specific example that we'll go over in depth, but for now, just go over these bullet points that are presented to you. The first one, we have hazard risks, and this is the most commonly identified area for risk, where you're seeing liability suits, fire and other property damage, and theft and other crime. Insurance is oftentimes part of the risk mitigation here. But of course, you want to be thinking of other processes and procedures as well. For example, in the case of environmental waste or contaminations, sewage spills or water safety breaches, or so you want to avoid as much as possible. So be able to do that, you want to have policies and procedures in place, security measures, training of employees, and investment in updated infrastructure, for example. So it's your risk management process and the risk mitigation process. What we're trying to have you consider is that you really want to expand that process besides just relying on one particular, in this case, insurance, or one particular method to mitigate the risk. Then you also have financial risks. We have listed here price, liquidity, and credit risk. Liquidity risk is something that was actually very prevalent, or that was a risk that was a real risk to the city, actually, even just a couple of years ago. Practical examples of liquidity risks are when departments were running at losses, or downturns in the economy, resulting in reduction of cash flow and receipts, and maybe even interruption of services. A liquidity risk could also relate to how your investment portfolio is managed. And recently, there were real liquidity risk as it relates to your bond and your bond compliance. So when you were not in compliance with your bonds, they were at risk at being called, which would severely impact city operations if that were to occur.
A question real quick on the liquidity cash flow.
Yes.
That has to do with how we invest our assets to make sure that we have enough liquidity. Is that basically what you're talking about?
Yes, not just that, just also just making sure that you can pay the bills, right?
Mhm.
So keep
Right.
operations going. Don't reduce, pay not only your bills, but your employees as well. So your costs to the cities, a large part of that is the employees and your police force and your fire department, parks. You don't want to
Gotcha.
reduce service if possible. So
Right.
having good liquidity enables you to do that.
Good points. And payroll is really important.
Very, very important. Yes.
Very important.
Yes.
I noticed everybody said yes.
Yeah, very much so. So, you
Thank
know,
you.
your constituents are not just the residents and businesses, it's also your employees, and making sure that you have good processes in place there where you don't risk losing good employees or having poor service, which is the next topic on the right, operational risk.
Before you leave, the one
Yes.
part of the credit is really important because with
Yes.
Standard and Poor's, for borrowing money and that kind of credit is extremely important because that sets your rate of that you pay for borrowing money, and that's a very, very important part of the whole process. So
Yes.
thank you for.
Absolutely. And the city has been so successful in improving your credit, because what
That's
that
right.
does, it leaves you more room to put in your services instead of paying interest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Operational risk is where the risk of maybe poor customer service. The government is there for your residents and the businesses in the city, and customer service is a direct reflection of how the city is operating. Succession planning is something I think that we've mentioned before, you know, we are all going through the baby boomers retiring out and making sure that if you have a functional, well-functioning department in place, do you have procedures or plans to make sure that that is still in existence if your top person leaves? Operational risk, we also have cybersecurity listed there. And operational risk, what it comes down to is that you want to minimize disruption of service and provide the best services to.
You know, that succession planning and cybersecurity is extremely important, you know, because in case of, well, vacation, somebody has to leave, or, you know, that succession planning, somebody has to take over, and cybersecurity is a major concern across not only Oxnard, California, and across in the world for that matter, you know,
Yes.
but really important.
Yep. Then we have strategic risks, demographic, social, cultural trends, technological innovations, and political trends. Demographics, do you know that your residents, are they older? Are they younger? Are you providing the services that they need within the city? And then reputational risk, which you hear more and more about, of course, as
That's
well,
right.
because everything is public, and your residents have access to public documents. So with the media and things, so procedural and policy mistakes by staff could harm your reputation, perceptions of misuse of government resources, and then fraud or contract mismanagement, or like Eden mentioned, potentially even corruption or kickbacks.
And that's why, Hong, I asked the initial question about the protocol for investigation. And I think the city manager set up a really good procedure for that, you know, to make sure that we check each other out, you know. I think it's extremely important.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then on the next slide, just to summarize the process again, we have some questions that you can ask as you're addressing a specific risk. For example, cybersecurity that you mentioned is a huge concern everywhere right now. And so in the city's case, for example, a cybersecurity breach, the risk evaluation, what's the likelihood of something happening and the impact that arises if it does happen? So, Mr. Mayor, what do you think the likelihood is currently?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Of a cybersecurity breach?
I think it's extremely important that oversight. Absolutely, yes. You know, yes.
Right, and so it's more
Just
likely.
don't click on it. That was fishing baiting. Don't click on that.
Yes, exactly. So the impact it's actually very quite harmful, right? So we will come to realize how much we all rely on computers and the internet over the last few years. So the impact of a cybersecurity breach is huge to the city. It's not, it could be financial, but it, like I mentioned, business interruption. It could be loss of important financial data, information, you know, your employees, personal information. So cybersecurity is a huge concern currently. So after you have done that evaluation, and you might think it's actually a substantial risk, maybe not even a moderate risk, you want to apply a risk treatment. So what are the range of options to address the risk, and what options did the city go for? What's the action plan? So this is something that you would be asking management for.
Right. And you know, the last two bullet points are really important. Is the plan in motion? Who's responsible for implementing the plan? And has the program been reviewed? And who's responsible for reviewing the plan? And how often do we review the plan? Those are really good really good questions, you know.
Exactly.
Mm.
So in terms of cyber security, we as your auditors are concerned with that because oftentimes it impacts your financial system. So we do work with city management already to assess their plans in place and the ERT department with our IT specialist. So just an example of a risk that is out there and that is actually also currently being addressed by management.
Thank you. Mhm.
So the last slide we have for you is even more specific questions that in summary that the audit committee can ask is what do you think your city's risk appetite and tolerance is? Are there any limitations to the risk or mitigating these risks? Options and actions are there to reduce the threats, and then what's the cost to the city? So this concludes our presentation for tonight. If you have any more questions, we're actually happy to answer them.
Yeah, let's see if we, I don't see we have any public comments on this item.
Mayor, we do not have any public comment. However, I will go ahead and
So
start
we
the timer.
start our 3 minutes.
Thank you.
In the meantime, while we're waiting for our 3 minutes, I just want to thank you for answering a lot of the questions that I had today. You know, I was mentioning to our city manager, also to Betsy, that when we first started this training, you know, you're kind of out there in the woods, you know, what are we trying to accomplish? And again, coming back to our city council, I kind of had to get my act together here. But that training really has helped out tremendously. And the questions I had is, what happens if what's the protocol for an investigation? What do we do? I think we're in the right direction, you know, with some of the options that we're putting together, and also the examples that you put together on the acceptance and the voids that transfer to reduce, you know, the development options for actions. You know, I think all those items are really, really important, that in order to enhance opportunity to reduce the threats to the city's objectives. All those items are really, really great. So I really enjoy it, and I have a tremendous amount of other questions, and I'm sure that our staff will help us out for the governance and committee. Councilwoman Basood, any additional questions that you might want to ask or are concerned about?
No, I greatly appreciated this presentation. I think it's extremely important for the council to kind of get an understanding of what it is that we need to do as council members, especially as far as, you know, the kind of appetite that we have for risk. You know, my appetite is, you know, I want no risk. I like playing it safe. So I greatly appreciate Eden Payne coming and giving us this presentation, and I'm looking forward to having the whole council listen to it in a regular council meeting. Thank you.
Can I add a little bit? So I just wanted to thank you as well for your participation at this session and the past 3 sessions. You know, Mayor Zaragoza, Councilmember Basua, you know, Alex, Betsy. You know, if you would like a copy of all these slides, we can provide you a binder of them along with additional information that may be useful.
That would be, I would like to have that. That will help us tremendously, you know. And again, you know, it's like any other student, you know, we can ask questions and ask more questions, you know, and so forth. But I think, you know, this earlier I asked the city manager and also Betsy George for some explanations, and it's kind of coming out clear now. So, but I want to thank you for an excellent presentation. And I think the city manager gave me a good explanation on the protocol for those items that I asked, so I want to thank you for that. And are any other calls? We have no other calls. So on this item, we are going to receive the training and so forth. Do we take this? What's our next procedure, Mr. City Attorney? Do we vote on that? It's just a receive and file.
This is just to receive the training. So no action is needed.
No action required. Thank you so much again, Edie and Payne, and also Eden and Hung. And thank you for all the good work, and Betsy and staff and Mr. City Manager for excellent presentation and some training. I know that I personally gonna need some more training, but thank you so much for the training up to date. Thank you again.
And Mayor, if I may just say, I think it's really important that we take Eden up on her offer on presenting us with the binder for the whole council, so we can each have the
Yes.
slide, so that these presentations.
Absolutely, because that will help the entire city council. Yes, thank you for
Yeah.
that.
So if we can
Appreciate it.
please just have staff follow up with that, I greatly would appreciate it.
Thank you. And I see Betsy and I see the city manager concurring. Thank you so much.
And Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry, just before we move on to the next item, I wanted to mention as a prelude to our November 23rd Finance and Governance Committee meeting, which one of the items will be the final policy for internal control and integrated framework that we've been implementing all year. And one of our to-dos as we implement those internal controls is to do a thorough risk assessment here at the city. And so
Fantastic.
that is going to be something that we'll be working on in the 2022 year. So be looking forward to that and digging in more on this topic with specific risks related to the city.
Thank you. Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much for excellent work. On behalf of the city council, thank you so much, and our residents and staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Have a good evening. Do you mind if I stick around? I wanted to see the presentation for the next topic.
Okay, thank you.
As long as it's free of charge, Eden.
Yeah.
Free of charge. Thank you so much. And our next item is the Finance Department, the subject's update on the Corrective Action Plan, CAP. Recommendation the city, this should be the Finance and Governance Committee, receive an update on the Corrective Action Plan and recommend that the update be presented to the city council. And again, this is there's a link on Measure M as a pre-recorded presentation. And of course, Councilwoman Basua, do you have any questions on the CAP? On the next item number 2.
No, Mayor, I don't have any. Well, I do actually have one question. During the presentation, it was noted that staff is working on a non-direct cost allocation that's going to be going out. When does staff anticipate that that's going to be going out for an RFP?
Yes, Council Member Basua, we have issued the RFP already and we've received back the responses. And so we now have a panel set to review the responses, and then so we're moving.
Can you please get the clock going?
We're in the process of selecting the provider. So yeah, we just didn't have the exact dates when we did the presentation.
Thank you, Ms. George. So do you anticipate that this contract will be awarded in the upcoming months and that we can see this work coming to completion?
Yes, we should be able to award the contract in the coming months, and our current timeline would have us implementing it with the July 1st, 2022, the beginning of that fiscal year.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
And then I did, just while we're also waiting for the clock to run down as well, is that I wanted to take the opportunity to introduce Jennifer Hiraoka, who's our Senior Manager of Internal Controls and joined the city back in May and has been acting as the controller, but has been integral in getting us through year end and the audit that Edie and Payne have been overseeing the last couple of months. And can answer any questions you have related to internal controls and the corrective action plan as well.
Okay, I was looking through my notes here and should have been listening more than what I did right now. But the question I have, we had a total in the corrective action, 184 findings, and we're down to 5. And those 5, how are we doing with those 5 unresolved items? Who's that? Is that
Hello,
Betsy?
Mr. Mayor. This is
Mhm.
Jennifer Hiroka. Nice to
Okay.
see you. So the 5 that we have, 3 of the findings are ready to be tested. And then the 1 is in progress. We have the RFP in progress.
Mhm.
And then the other one is IT related. And I believe that update is provided separately to council in a separate
Okay.
additional documentation.
Okay, let me see. We got ongoing training and okay, that's personally all I have, so.
Okay.
I think it's excellent work, and I think we've done a lot of work, and I think that we talked a lot about the material weaknesses, significant deficiencies that have been taken care of, and I think staff has done an excellent job, and something that we need to be really proud of, here from the finance department. So I really don't have any. Do I have any? We have another 9 seconds to go here.
Yeah, I
Do
was
we
just
ha-
going to concur that we do. We have a great team in the finance department, and I know Ms. Hiroka and myself are fairly new, but the bulk of the team here has helped, Mr. Riper and Donna
Absolutely.
in the past work through all of those items. So yeah, we're lucky to have the team
And-
in place that we do.
No, I believe that that you're doing an excellent job, and I want to thank from the finance department because that's a great milestone that we've reached, with all the findings that corrective action plan that we've worked through up to October 2021. So with that in mind, Councilwoman Basua.
Yes, Mayor, if I just can make a comment in regards to Mrs. Hiroka's presentation. I want to commend the finance staff. And in the beginning of the presentation, Ms. Hiroka states to the general public that there wasn't going to be much change that we're going to hear in regards to where they're at with these deficiencies, but that they made the decision to come back with us within the 6-month period, even though we weren't going to get much
That's right.
update. And that speaks highly of the transparency within this department, because as staff, I think it's really easy to say, let's push it out. Let's push it out to the beginning of the year. Maybe we'll have some more news by then. There's really nothing to report. And the fact that they're here, they did this presentation for us. I want to commend this department. I just think it speaks very, very highly of the kind of finance department that we have. And they are not going to back down. They're going to come to us. Good news, bad news, no news. And I really want to make sure that I commend you and the staff for that. To hear that at the beginning of the presentation, was just, wow, okay. So again, congratulations to Ms. George and her whole team. I'm really looking forward to, the next 6 months and hearing that hopefully we've got all these resolved. So thank you.
Agree. And again, thank you so much. I couldn't have said any better than you did. Thank you, Councilwoman Basua, and outstanding work. And Mr. City Manager, you have to be proud of your staff. You got a good staff going for us. And not only in the finance department, every single department that we have in the city right now is working right in tune with the whole process. But the finance department is a base. But one of the most important things that we mentioned earlier, payroll is very important. Don't forget that. Thank you so much. So with that, and I'd like to make a motion that we approve this item and also to recommend that the update be presented to the Oxnard City Council.
I will second that motion, Mayor.
Roll call.
Councilmember Basua,
Aye.
Chair Zaragoza.
I'm
Thank you. Motion passes.
okay. So then let me go back, and I think that's the last item that we have. And Councilor Basu, any items that you'd like to see for future agenda items?
No, nothing at all. Thank you.
And I don't have any either, so we're adjourned until 6:45. Thank you so much and appreciate all the work you've done today. Thank you.